Just looking at the speed of supposed space debris. This is a little snippet from NASA. Space debris may not sound dangerous until one realizes that in low Earth orbit, up to about 1,200 miles in altitude, such debris collides with an average speed of about 22,370 miles an hour, according to NASA. Wow! So now we've got an idea of an average sort of speed, i.e. about 22,000 miles an hour, this space debris of all different shapes and sizes is travelling. Let's get some idea with this illustration of the space debris problem, which essentially goes from 57 up to 2015. Of course, it'll be a lot worse now, but you get the point. So let's have a look. Starts to get very messy by the 70s, supposedly. The 80s is just daft. The 90s is ridiculous. I mean, from the noughties onwards, look at the state of that. So that there, it's a lot worse now. We're talking another 6 years supposedly contributing towards that mess. So it's very strange that if that was true, and bizarre by the fact that when NASA, SpaceX, all these agencies have their launch, they never ever take into account space debris. Bizarre. I think you'd want to know where items travelling at 22,000 mile an hour, or that can hit you, at 22,000 mile an hour, are travelling. But strangely enough, they're only interested in the weather. Very strange. It's as if the rocket goes off, out of sight, and lands. They just need to know the weather to make sure the rocket can get to where it needs to get to safely, out of sight. They obviously, clearly, bizarrely, don't care about the space debris problem with items hurtling round the ball, supposedly. I wonder why. Could it be that it's not true and the globe's not true? We simply watch firework to space? Of course that's the case. That's why it's never taken into consideration at rocket launches. It's always about the weather. Let's make sure that firework gets to where it needs to go, i.e. out of sight, and then we'll cue the CGI and the space pantomime. It would be impossible, I think, this day and age, to launch rockets into that mess. And then you supposedly got the ISS flying around that mess at 17,500 miles an hour. Clearly ridiculous. Clearly. They've even got the cheek to show us images like this from Chris Hadfield, supposedly, when he was on the ISS, ducking and diving through that lot. This hole supposedly appeared on the ISS. The story: when your spaceship suddenly starts leaking air, you fix your hole with duct tape and a gob of epoxy. Nice save. Woo! Ridiculous. So that ISS is meant to be doing ludicrous speeds around that, through that, clearly ridiculous. No one takes that into account when they launch. It's just the weather, strangely enough. We got silly stories like that, which just make no sense whatsoever when you consider our friend here, the U-2 pilot, has to wear his spacesuit, and if he had a hole in his plane like that, and his spacesuit didn't have his spacesuit on, his blood would boil. But when you get a hole like this on the ISS, some epoxy, don't worry about it, and a bit of duct tape, and we'll juggle some tomatoes as well. Don't worry about a spacesuit. Can you see how daft all of this is? He will die if he gets a hole like that in his plane. But strangely enough, matey boy doesn't have to worry too much. You can juggle some tomatoes, get a gob of, a gob of epoxy, not that you'd want to put that in your mouth, and some duct tape. Hey, no worries, and get the tomatoes out and have a juggle. Again, ridiculous. The ISS is a charade, a show. One that has really fallen short in recent years and has been found out. Many reasons: airfix models, CGI, holes in supposed space stations, contradictions. This man needs this. in his aircraft at 70,000 feet. And if he gets a hole in his aircraft like that, without wearing a spacesuit, he's dead instantly. But if you're in a spacecraft, bizarrely enough, and you get a hole in your spacecraft, juggle some tomatoes, kick back, and eventually repair it with some epoxy and a bit of duct tape. Sweet as a nut.